Howdy, second grade. How do you do? What's that? It's a great question. Somebody asked, Mr. Butler, why are you standing outside by a bunch of banana plants? The answer is simple. In our story, chapter 2 today, Grandmama lights a big fat stinky cigar, and honestly I had to get out of the house and get some fresh air, so here I am with some bananas, getting some freshness. Story is written at a different time, different place. What we do want to be looking for today is foreshadowing. There's going to be some points where Roald Dahl kind of tells us what's happening at the end of the story, at the beginning of the story. I think nowadays you would call that a spoiler alert, but be on the lookout. I hope you enjoy today's chapter. It's kind of big, so I'm going to break it up into 2. So it's going to be part 1 of chapter 2. Tomorrow will be part 2. Enjoy. I myself had 2 separate encounters with witches before I was 8 years old. From the first I escaped unharmed, but on the second occasion I was not so lucky. Things happened to me that will probably make you scream when you read about them. That can't be helped. The truth must be told. The fact that I am still here and able to speak to you, however peculiar I may look, is due entirely to my wonderful grandmother. My grandmother was Norwegian. The Norwegians know all about witches, for Norway, with its black forests and icy mountains, is where the first witches came from. My father and my mother were also Norwegian, but because my father had a business in England, I had been born there and had lived there and had started going to an English school. Twice a year, at Christmas and in the summer, we went back to Norway to visit my grandmother. This old lady, as far as I could gather, was just about the only surviving relative we had on either side of our family. She was my mother's mother, and I absolutely adored her. When she and I were together, we spoke in either Norwegian or in English. It didn't matter which. We were equally fluent in both languages, and I have to admit that I felt closer to her than to my mother. Soon after my 7th birthday, my parents took me, as usual, to spend Christmas with my grandmother in Norway, and it was over there, while my father and mother and I were driving in icy weather just north of Oslo, that our car skidded off the road and went tumbling down into a rocky ravine. My parents were killed. I was firmly strapped into the back seat and received only a cut on the forehead. I won't go into the horrors of that terrible afternoon. I still get the shivers when I think about it. I finished up, of course, back in my grandmother's house, with her arms around me tight, and both of us crying the whole night long. "What are we going to do now?" I asked her, through the tears. "You will stay here with me," she said, "and I will look after you." "Aren't I going back to England?" "No," she said. "I could never do that. Heaven shall take my soul, but Norway shall keep my bones." The very next day, in order that we might both try to forget our great sadness, my grandmother started telling me stories. She was a wonderful storyteller, and I was enthralled by everything she told me, but I didn't become really excited until she got on to the subject of witches. She was apparently a great expert on these creatures, and she made it very clear to me that her witch stories, unlike most of the others, were not imaginary tales. They were all true. They were the gospel truth. They were history. Everything she was telling me about witches had actually happened, and I had better believe it. What was worse, what was far, far worse, was that witches were still with us. They were all around us, and I had better believe that too. "Are you really being truthful, Grandmama? Really, really and truly truthful?" "My darling," she said, "you won't last long in the world if you don't know how to spot a witch when you see one." "But you told me that witches look like ordinary women, Grandmama, so how can I spot them?" "You must listen to me," my grandmother said. "You must remember everything I tell you. After that, all you can do is cross your heart and pray to heaven and hope for the best." We were in the big living room of her house in Oslo, and I was ready for bed. The curtains were never drawn in that house, and through the windows I could see huge snowflakes falling slowly onto an outside world that was as black as tar. My grandmother was tremendously old and wrinkled, with a massive wide body which was smothered in gray lace. She sat there majestic in her armchair, filling every inch of it. Not even a mouse could have squeezed in to sit beside her. I myself, just 7 years old, was crouched on the floor at her feet, wearing pajamas, dressing gown, and slippers. I want to pause right there because this is our first instance of foreshadowing. In that last paragraph, Roald Dahl just kind of did a spoiler alert and gave us a hint as to what's coming later on in this book. We'll have to wait and see, though. "You swear you weren't pulling my leg?" I kept saying to her. "You swear you aren't just pretending?" "Listen," she said. "I have known no less than 5 children who have simply vanished off the face of this earth, never again to be seen. The witches took them." "I still think you're just trying to frighten me," I said. "I am trying to make sure you don't go the same way," she said. "I love you, and I want you to stay with me." "Well, tell me about the children who disappeared," I said. My grandmother was the only grandmother I ever met who smoked cigars. She lit one now, a long black cigar that smelt of burning rubber. "The first child I knew who disappeared," she said, "was called Ragnhild Hansen. Ragnhild was about 8 at the time, and she was playing with her little sister on the lawn. Their mother, who was baking bread in the kitchen, came outside for a breath of air. 'Where's Ragnhild?' she asked. 'She went away with the tall lady,' the little sister answered. 'What tall lady?' the mother said. 'The tall lady in the white gloves,' the little sister said. 'She took Ragnhild by the hand and led her away. No one,' my grandmother said, 'ever saw Ragnhild again.'" "Well, did they search for her?" I asked. "They searched for miles around. Everyone in the town helped, but they never found her." "What happened to the other 4 children?" I asked. "They vanished just as Ragnhild did." "Well, how, Grandmama? How did they vanish?" "In every case, a strange lady was seen outside the house just before it happened." "But how did they vanish?" I asked. Wow, that was a pretty heavy chapter. A lot to digest there. So, main points. Roald Dahl himself was born Norwegian, so I wonder when he writes about Norway and having parents from Norway, I wonder if he's making that up or if he's pulling from life experiences there. Compare and contrast. Our main character, coincidentally enough, we don't know his name yet. I don't know why that is, but we do know that he does not have a mom and dad. Very much like another Roald Dahl story that we just finished reading. Does anybody know? Hands, don't shout out. You don't hide. Go ahead. Ooh, yes, James and the Giant Peach. His parents died. I think it was a rhinoceros. Ugh. This time we have a car accident. Not very happy. Now we're talking about strangers. Talking about witches, which I know we all know not to take things from strangers, but we've got one child that's disappeared, and Grandmama's going to tell us tomorrow about 4 other children that have disappeared. Whew, it's getting me scared. I don't know what to do with that. Hopefully you guys can sleep well tonight. We will see you tomorrow.